Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So the Supreme Court has sort of painted themselves into a corner. This is middle of January 2026, the head of a tariff decision that they plan to make. Looks like they're leaning against President Trump, and I say they, I mean Amy Coney Barrett and John Roberts. They think it's their role to have established clear checks on power, and that they need to curb in executive power the way that Trump's interpreted, or the Trump administration has interpreted their ability to provide taxation to foreign countries and through tariffs. And of course, the Trump position is, and it's been a good one, it's restoring trade imbalances, all kinds of moneyed interests that have been playing in the background, using the checks on power system of the United States against it to out-leverage them in negotiations and essentially get the United States to pay for everybody's goodies. It's a massive drain of the wealth of the United States, produced by really the only capitalist country there is in the world, and all the parasitic nature of the rest of the world, and to confiscating that wealth to create balances for themselves in order to give on paper the illusion that everybody's equal in contributing to economic viability. This is central banking at its finest. This is why in the Constitution, the not resolving how money is managed correctly on the between the checks on powers allowed money and interest to essentially take over and run the government behind the scenes. And there's no way that Congress, even though that's the legislative mechanism that should be in place to regulate these kinds of things, and that executive branch authority, from the point of view of Roberts and Coney Barrett, based on oral arguments that's already been provided to them, seem to be indicating that they would like to make this a congressional issue and not let a kingly executive branch member, whoever it may be, whether it's Trump or somebody else, have this kind of power over the world's economy. And I would argue, and everybody knows, I love the Supreme Court. I think it's one of the great inventions of the human mind in the history of the world, and its function is quite important. And I am a huge fan of the way that the United States has created its government. I love the Library of Congress, where it's at. Right next to it's the Supreme Court, and across the street is the Capitol building. That is probably one of the smartest places on planet Earth that you can be to make important decisions about the way the world works. And I love the halls of the Supreme Court. So I think this is a good debate. It's an accurate one, but I would argue to those who function within the Supreme Court and the intelligence that feeds it from those various mechanisms, that the real check on power is the elections we have. If you can have free and honest elections, that is your balance of power. People have voted to put Trump in the White House for this very reason, to go solve a lot of the problems that have not been solved by Congress or the Supreme Court, and have moneyed interest, centralized banking, out leverage everybody through manipulations and lobbying that have essentially made a dysfunctional trade relationship around the world and put America last instead of America first. So the problem they being Coney Barrett and Roberts and the other liberal members on the Supreme Court, are certainly leveraging to have an anti-Trump position. The problem they have is, if they rein in the executive powers they've been so successful that Trump has initiated, then they're going to cause catastrophic economic conditions overnight, and take away all the leverage that the United States has gained and throw it back in the hands of those manipulators like China and Russia and other countries, and it's going to destabilize the world, and that's going to be on them. So they pushed off the decision. They were going to give it some sort of opinion at the end of the week, middle of January. They pushed it off to a following Tuesday, third week of January, essentially. Who knows what they're actually going to say. The issue with videos like this is the current information which we're given right now is very fast moving. And most people who watch it will watch it after the opinion was made. What I'm concerned with is the overall philosophic debate, not necessarily the result. There's already a plan B. If the Supreme Court takes that power away from Trump, the ability to tariff other nations in the way that these emergency powers, there's other legal ways to go do it, and the Trump administration certainly will, to regain the revenue gained, which is a couple $100 billion. And there's other ways to skin the cat, and the Trump administration certainly will. But it would be extremely unfortunate for the Supreme Court to stick themselves in the middle of that activity, because the problem emerged through manipulation of the money powers using the bureaucracy of the checks on power, the separations that the various branches have against the system itself, so people could profit off of it. And that's come from these trade imbalances. So if they rule against Trump, who's fixed the problem because he was elected to fix it, then they're essentially going after the mechanism that the American people have come up with through free elections to solve the problem. We put an executive in this position in the White House, someone with a proven track record of being a good negotiator, to do exactly this. And then the Supreme Court would undermine that process, which, if they're trying to make an argument that they're trying to keep the Constitution honest, and that is have checks on power and not give the executive branch that much power, then you're throwing it back in the hands of the financial interests who have caused the problem to begin with. And then you're going to call it fairness when it clearly isn't. It's an unfair system that was taken advantage of, and we corrected it through elections. And that's what Trump has been doing, exactly the bidding of the American people. And if the Supreme Court rules against that, they're essentially feeding the problem that caused the problem in the first place. So you might sit down and sit in the halls of the Supreme Court, call it honorable regulations on checks on power, but all you're doing is you're feeding the problem that created everything to be wrong in the first place. And you're throwing it back in the hands of the bad guys. And the bad guys are all the financial interests who really make a mockery of our governmental system, our checks on power, and put it back in the hands of strongmen like Xi Jinping, when he doesn't have to go get approvals and anything. As a communist dictator, they can make decisions and do whatever he wants. And that creates an out of leverage situation against the United States, because there has to be checks on power in the United States, and then they use that against us. Where I would argue that the checks on power is the election process itself. So if you don't like the job that the president does in 4 years, you can load him out. And that's the checks on power. But to rely on Congress with all the lobbying power that is going on behind the scenes and expect that system to work real well, it's a fantasy at best. And that's why we had to go to extraordinary measures and bring in somebody like a Trump to run the executive branch and restore the trade imbalances through tough negotiations using tariffs to do it. And it's been very successful. And any interruption of that right now is going to fall on the hands of the Supreme Court. So they are obviously looking for an off-ramp to find a way to regulate out of control, what they think out of control executive powers are, and put it in the hands of Congress, get Congress to write rules that solve the problem. But the problem is that's a long-term solution, and this is a very short-term problem of getting restoration. And if they interrupt that process, it could cripple the United States in ways that are detrimental, truly detrimental. So they got a problem, and it's not an easy one to solve. And no matter how they come up with it, if they tamper with the presidential powers that were put there by the people who voted for Trump, and now you're undermining the true checks on powers that are the real beauty behind our government. Because even if it's dysfunctional between the three branches, people can still elect representatives, come in and trade out the ones that are not effective, which is essentially what we've done. And the Supreme Court is having to now make a decision to try and say constitutionally we're going to stand behind checks on power, when the real checks on power was putting in an executive that solved the problem when the rest of the branches of government have not been able to do it up to this point and been taken advantage of by a lot of manipulative foreign and domestic financial interests that have played the game against voters for their own profit. And they've rigged a system that has gotten out of control and turned into a real monster, and now we're trying to solve it through elections, through the election of Trump. So even no matter what the Supreme Court does, Trump administration has a backup plan to solve the problem, but to show the world and signal the world that our checks on power is actually something that works to their advantage, where it gives them leverage over us, I don't think is the message the Supreme Court's looking for. They're looking for fairness, and the fairness that they're going to end up giving are those hostile to the United States an unfair advantage over everybody, over the United States in ways that are embarrassing and have been detrimental up to this point. So we'll see what they do, but that's what's at stake, and I think they've got themselves into quite a mix here, because no matter how much they rule towards checks on separations of powers, they're going to cause a problem because the rest of the world is not adhering to our rules. And Trump's been the only one so far that's been able to out-leverage all those enemies in the ways that they construct mechanisms to profit for themselves at our peril. And Trump's put an end to it, and the Supreme Court doesn't want to interfere with that. They shouldn't. And they need to support what the true checks on powers has been, which is free and open elections. If you don't like the person that's doing the job for you, then vote them out. Don't rely on other branches of government to do what we elect them to do initially, and if they fail to do so, we don't take quick action to replace them at the ballot box, which we should. Anyways, Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you haven't read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.